So I ended last video by saying that Jackson's presidency is going to be defined by three separate problems. And the first problem that we're going to take a look at that defined Jackson's presidency is going to be the relationship with the United States and the Native Americans. And if we kind of look at the map here, we can see that as Jackson's becoming president in the late 1820s, that the United States is moving westward at a pretty rapid pace. Including states like Illinois, Louisiana, Mississippi, eventually Missouri as well that we've spoken about. And you can see in this migration patterns here that they are becoming cultivated and part of a growing United States culture. So the Americans are moving westward very quickly, and it's going to start to kind of get in the way of the Native Americans who have already kind of settled in these lands, the Chickasaws and the Cherokees, to name a few. So when Georgia finds gold in the northern part of their state, they're going to have a massive amount of people who want to migrate out to that part of Georgia and even farther west looking for gold. However, this land is already controlled by Cherokees, and the government is going to forcibly seize Cherokee lands from them in the name of Georgian law. And the Cherokees are going to set a precedent by suing the Georgian government. So in this court or this case will go all the way to the Supreme Court, known as Cherokee versus Georgia. And under the authority of Chief Justice John Marshall, the Cherokee are actually going to win the court case, saying that the state government cannot just forcibly seize the lands. They have to work a treaty out just as you would with any other sort of foreign nation. And in traditional Jacksonian fashion, Andrew Jackson will take this decision by John Marshall and basically not follow it. He comes out and says that, if John Marshall wants to enforce his own ruling, let him do so. Basically, Jackson's way of saying that he is not going to follow this ruling, and because the president has the enforcement power, it is not going to matter. So even though the Cherokee group wins their court case against the state of Georgia, Congress and President Jackson are going to both pass and sign the Indian Removal Act of 1830, basically forcing all Native Americans moving westward past the Mississippi River into what we would consider like present-day Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska. And this forcible movement of the army escorting the Cherokee tribes out westward is going to become known as the Trail of Tears. And many Americans, a huge majority of these Native Americans, are going to die on the way to Oklahoma, and it's really going to be seen kind of the human rights atrocity for the Jackson presidency. Now, from the perspective of Andrew Jackson, you can see here in the political cartoon with the Native Americans kind of resting at his feet and him holding them in almost like a father or grandfather fashion. He truly believed that this would be best for the Native Americans to avoid future conflicts, that if they had their own piece of land while the Americans had their piece of land, it would be a lot more peace-friendly or more of a treaty, so forth, with the two groups while infringing on their rights, but also forcing them out of their territory of Georgia. All right, so the second of the controversies that is going to define the Jacksonian presidency is going to be this idea of tariffs. And we've talked about tariffs already, meaning that it is a tax on an imported good. So if, let's say that we are importing cloths from England, we want to try to make American cloth more competitive in the open market, so we're going to put a 25% tariff on British cloth. And what that will do to the price of British cloth is to make it $5 a roll rather than $4 a roll. What that will hopefully do then is to incentivize businesses to buy the American-made cloth at $4 a roll to help with the American businesses. So when these tariffs come in place, when John Quincy Adams leaves office, they are going to be made to kind of help benefit northern industry at the expense of the southern and western farmers, because it creates higher prices for them. And states like South Carolina are going to refer to these as the tariff of abominations, because they vehemently oppose these tariffs, because it does make their cotton and it makes their products that much more expensive and harder to sell. So when Jackson becomes president, he, of course, wants to lower tariffs, but he's got quite a bit of problem on his hands, and also has to do with his own vice president, John C. Calhoun. So in 1932, When the Congress passes even a higher tariff, the southern states are going to raise their hands and say, whoa, 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 this is unfair. These are violating states' rights. And one of the leaders of this is going to be Vice President John Calhoun, who is from South Carolina. And they threaten to nullify or basically ignore this unfair federal tax on imported goods. So John C. Calhoun, as you can see pictured here, as a representative of the issue on states' rights from the state of South Carolina. Remember, he is a Democratic Republican, as we've mentioned at nauseum, that the Democrat Republicans believe in states' rights over federal government rights. And he believes that the states should have some sort of check on the federal government if they believe they are passing laws that are unconstitutional. So this version of nullification would be as a way to kind of check on those unconstitutional federal laws. So he's going to support South Carolina not enforcing these tariffs. However, on the other hand, you have Andrew Jackson, who is the president, who believes that even though there should be a strong support for states' rights, that the states do not have the authority to not follow federal law, and is vehemently opposed to any sort of seceding done from the states in case they want to not follow a certain law. So he is going to basically urge Congress to force this force bill on the state of South Carolina or any other state that would want to not follow the tariffs. And President Jackson even goes as far as sending troops to South Carolina to enforce the federal marshals, or the state marshals, I'm sorry, to enact the law or to follow the laws that are put in place by the federal government, including taxation. So you have this nullification crisis on your hands where you have a state like South Carolina who is threatening to not follow federal law and even threatening to secede the union if they need to, and you have the president who is supporting federal law and trying to make sure that states have to follow the federal laws. So we get to, again, Henry Clay, who was kind of like our Mr. Compromise. We've seen him already with the Missouri Compromise, is going to come up with the Compromise of 1833, which basically solves the nullification crisis, introduces lower tariffs, and is allowed for this conflict to be resolved between the North and the South. But one of the issues with this is it does show a growing sense of sectionalism between the North and South, and this growing friction between the northern states and the southern states, who are conflicting over their economies, who are conflicting over what comes first, a federal government or state governments, and the continued threat of slavery. John C. Calhoun is a huge proponent of slavery and is terrified that if the northern states get their way and the federal government gets any larger or has more power over the states, that eventually abolition will become part of the platform that the North pushes on the South. So he sees this kind of issue of slavery arising and wants to try to stomp down any sort of anti-states' rights legislation before it ever happens. All right, so now we get into the third and final controversy that will define the Jackson presidency, and this is going to be over the fight with the Second Bank of the United States. So we've talked before about with Hamilton versus Jefferson of having a national bank, and now in 1816 we get to a point where a second national bank is created, and Jackson, being a Jeffersonian Republican at heart, vehemently disapproves of having a national bank. He believes that based on principle, it's unconstitutional, that it gives an unchecked power to the rich and to the wealthy, and that it's very undemocratic, and that it should be more left up to the states. He is going to run against Henry Clay in 1832 for president. Now, Henry Clay is a strong proponent of a national bank because it has allowed for the economic growth under his American system. The problem, though, is that the national bank is, in Jackson's eyes, is controlled too much by private businesses and gives way too much power to the elite. And remember, Andrew Jackson thinks of himself as the common man's president. So you have Henry Clay and then the bank manager, his name is Nicholas Biddle, who are supporting and trying to recharter or basically try to renew having a national bank. However, Jackson is going to win the election of 32 by vehemently running against the national bank, and due to popular opinion, is going to get the support of the people and wins his re-election against Henry Clay easily. With that, Jackson then is going to veto the bank's recharter and kill the Bank of the United States within the 4-year span. So by 1836, the bank will therefore be gone. So once the bank is finished, Jackson is going to pull all federal money from these banks of the United States, and he's going to put them in state banks, or what the opponents of Jackson will call pet banks, basically meaning that it is a corrupt system that is favoring the people that Jackson likes. And as you can see here, then every state will now have its own currency, and the federal government will no longer have the power to regulate currency or to create their own currency or to have a system of currency the same way that we would think of as today. And what this basically does is it kills the bank. So the national bank is no longer a thing, and will no longer be a thing up until the 1900s. It's also going to lead to the panic or the depression of the 1830s, and this depression will regulate all the way into the 1840s. And one of the reasons for this is it creates a lot of economic instability in the market. Once, if you are a land speculator or if you're somebody who works in the stock market, you need assurance that it will continue to grow. When we pull money from the bank, it kills the economic outlook because people don't know what's going to happen to the economy of the United States moving forward. So you have land speculators who cannot purchase land or stop purchasing land. You have banks who stop issuing out loans because they don't know if they're going to be able to be paid back. You have people who are stop investing in the stock market. So the economy comes to a screeching halt. And again, this is going to be a direct cause, or a direct, effect that will lead to the depression in the 1830s and 1840s. So in order to kind of recap and sum up the Jackson presidency, we have a new era in American democracy, because now you have somebody, or you have political parties who are trying to, in this populist manner, who are trying to make themselves seem like they are part of the common man. Remember, Andrew Jackson is the first person to really kind of run on a platform of, I am for the ordinary citizen. I'm not an elite. I'm part of you, or I'm part of your culture, your ordinary way of life, the middle and lower class to be represented. However, not everybody will agree with this interpretation. Again, we can see this political cartoon showing Andrew Jackson as a king. So if you are an opponent of Andrew Jackson, you believe he's a tyrant, he's a king who has used the power of the presidency to create a spoils system, who has directly increased the power of the federal government, who has used his veto to be almost like a king. But if you're a proponent of him, you see him as the ordinary man who's kind of fending off the elite status to try to support the common person. Because of this opposition, a strong opposition to Andrew Jackson, we will get a new political party in American politics called the Whig Party, who will basically bring us back to a two-party system, because the Federalist Party has been dead since the Hartford Convention. And we will now see the Democratic Party versus the Whig Party here moving forward. The Whig Party being more of this New England, middle state area, the upper northwestern part, so Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, while the Democrat Party contributes more to the southern states and also to the southern western states like Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, and so forth. So what we're going to do when we meet again in class is we're going to kind of go through and assess each of these Democrat or Democrat-Republican presidents with their major issues as far as wars, embargoes, crises, or anything that happened of note during their presidencies, and you're going to have to identify them as either successes or criticisms and give each of these presidents a grade. So make sure you come in with some back knowledge on this. Also come in with any questions that you have, and I will see you next time.